So I was up here earlier. I like to soak up a room before the speech so I can sort of get a feeling for what the vibe is and connect with the corners of the room and everything. And there was peppier music playing, and so I was like expressing myself. And somebody tweeted, "Oh, Dave's got the moves." Well, folks, there's going to be a dance party later on today. It's so great to be alive. You know, as some of you know, 6 years ago, I was on the way out. I was dying. I was saved by great medicine. You know, I have significant attitudes about the weaknesses in our practice, our use of the scientific method in medicine. If you were here yesterday and heard me talking about during Q&A in one of the sessions, I have opinions. I'm going to express some of those, and it's because I know what's possible when we achieve the best, and it is a freaking tragedy when we fall short, okay? And there are some cultural assumptions that can be corrected through social media that get in the way of the best information being at the point where it's needed. My view is that social media is a pipeline of patient needs and perspectives. What the heck does that mean? Who said that? The Institute of Medicine, in their big report last year, Best Care at Lower Cost, said that the learning healthcare system must be anchored on patient needs and perspectives. They did not say we ought to stop and think about patient needs and perspectives as we do our work. They said anchored on. This conference, what you see right here, patients up front, patients encouraged to be included, this exemplifies it. Citizen scientists. Jack, are you still in the room? Oh, darn. Man, that kid, I tell you what. So consider this, citizen scientists, right? Rewriting the rules of medical industry. Anybody recognize this? This is from 2001 in Wired magazine. This is not something new, but as we'll be covering in the next few minutes, it takes a while for medicine to realize what's happening. It's a good thing that medicine isn't full of just fruitcakes who jump at every new idea that comes up. But boy, can they be stodgy to the point where it induces harm. I also wanted to say from Jack, Carla, are you here? Yeah, okay. So Carla and I, 20 years ago, were co-leaders of the ADD Forum on CompuServe. And when I heard Jack's talk, I thought, he's talking, my daughter's a high school science teacher. I'd really like to see the two of them meet up. Anyway, what came to mind was a shirt that we created in this forum. This is not exactly it, but I Googled it today, and son of a gun, somebody made a shirt out of it. You're boring. The problem is I can't pay attention. Isn't that I can't pay attention? I think Thomas Edison, got kicked out of first grade because he couldn't sit still. And he went out riding the rails. He put a chemistry lab in an empty boxcar on a train, set the thing on fire. Sound familiar? Well, this is my notes. I tweeted a few minutes ago. This is my notes for this talk, a little bit non-linear, but this is what I'm going to cover here. I have an online social media relationship with my doctor. This morning, as I was talking about how I had just too much to say in 15 minutes, of course, he is methodical. He is my doctor. He's a good friend. He says, say less, but say it effectively. And then he said, doors closing, break a leg. And I thought, break a leg? Dude, I did that. Like 6 years ago, that was my femur. It's like I'd prefer a different metaphor, please, different kind of encouragement. But here's the thing. I mean, I'm seen as rebellious sometimes because I say that medicine ought to do things differently, but I was saved by great medicine. I mean, look at that. That golf ball-sized tumor in 6 months became that size. So I say, thank you, medicine. Patients included. This conference exemplifies it as well as, if not better than anyone else. Some of you who've been here in the past know Lucian Englund at the Academic Medical Center in Nijmegen on the western border of the Netherlands. He will no longer speak at any conference, even for pay, if they don't actively support patients being involved. You could say he saw the future that the Institute of Medicine later wrote about, being anchored on patient needs and perspectives. Now, I don't say this as a social radical saying, damn you, listen to me. I mean, seriously, if you want to talk about an industry that went through change, I used to be one of the top marketing people in the world in the industry that made typesetting machines. And man, when desktop publishing came along, that was an industry that changed incredibly, fell to pieces, and it was because the core asset, fonts, got to be in your hands without having to go through the establishment. And so my concern about retooling medicine is that if we don't listen to the patient voice, all right, if we don't listen to the patient voice, we will not optimize what's possible. And this is the most underused value of social media. Some people, some federal agencies will use social media to keep people at bay. Whoa, 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 control your opinions, people. Well, you can listen and find out what people are concerned about, so people know, you know what people are talking about, so you know what just happened, you keep up on things. Here's an important thing. We talk about patients, well, and providers also, who don't understand properly what's happening. People perform better when they're informed better, and this takes all kinds of forms. You know, as you just heard from Leah, if patients don't understand the information they're looking at, they're not going to do a good job. Conversely, if clinicians have wrong information in the medical record, or if the research that they're reading is out of date, they're not going to be able to perform to the top of their training. And one of the key sources of dysfunction, in my experience, is when people think that reality is certain and static. I had one doctor, I was reading a blog, Bob Wachter's blog, about certification and recertification of doctors. One doctor left a flaming comment saying, "I was certified as competent 32 years ago. How dare you imply I need to be tested again?" Well, I'm serious, you know, and you go in there, well, let's look at some facts. See, there's this idea of information liquidity. I'm a data geek. Okay, now not liquid is on the left, like a coal train. And I don't mean John Coltrane. Who knows, maybe his name's John. Instead of Thomas, maybe it's John, I don't know. Anyway, things that are not liquid, it takes effort to move them. And this is the way information used to be 30 years ago. And when something shows up, you got to explain how it got here. Well, information liquidity means that the stuff just flows all around like crazy. You can't control it. Now, to a linear thinker who is taught to think carefully, this is a disaster. This is like the world being uncontrollable. Indeed, controlling the flow takes effort. The problem is, of course, because it takes authority to get something onto the coal train, it doesn't take authority to get something into the river. We end up with confusion. Well, information liquidity transforms what's possible. So we now understand that what's happening. For instance, my miraculous cure, I got a drug called high-dosage interleukin-2 that I learned about from a patient community. It usually doesn't work, but when it does, about half the time, the effect is complete and permanent. Guess what? 3 out of 4 kidney cancer patients never hear that this stuff exists as an option. Okay? That, to me, that's a failure of medicine. And the reason they don't is because the database where oncologists are taught to look is 10 years out of date. 10 years out of date, and yet the patient community knows about it. This generic network diagram that we have here, after I'd used this slide for about 2 years, I came to realize something. In medicine, information is essentially a nutrient. It enables good things to happen, and it flows through capillaries on these network diagrams. Okay, those dotted lines are like capillaries. This explains how a valuable resource can get to a place where it's needed in ways that we didn't understand years earlier. Susanna Fox, 2 years ago, gave me this book, and it just stopped my thinking dead in my tracks. I wanted to blog about it. I wanted to review it. I couldn't figure out what to say. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It's a tome, and it just shook my knowledge, my understanding of the scientific method and the practice of medicine. It's a phenomenal history of cancer, the biology, what we know about the biology of cancer, the medicine of cancer, the politics of cancer. And one of the things that just shook me and paralyzed me, this is the first time I've ever spoken about this book, is that knowing that they didn't know what was happening, doctors insisted that women get chopped up, brutally sometimes, without knowing that it was actually going to fix things. Now, what do you do? What do you do, especially when a patient comes in with a question and gets told basically, shut up, I'll tell you what to think? Now, I know that's not always the case. This is not a blanket assertion. I know, especially on the Twitter feed for this event, I see people interpreting individual statements as generalizations. Well, here's, if you want evidence, this is the Institute of Medicine in 2001. You may have heard that it takes 17 years for physicians to adopt new practices. I finally, last year, found the original paper from the Institute of Medicine Yearbook of Informatics in 2000. Look at this evidence. Flu vaccine, 32 years after the seminal study in 1968, only 55% of doctors were following the protocol. Now, this is not an indictment of all doctors. It says it's a really good idea for patients to do some research and find out. By the way, the hallmark of what we call participatory medicine is a patient finds something and they come to the doctor and say, what do you think? All right, that's the partnership. Beta blockers, 18 years later, 1982 study, only 62% of doctors were following the new protocol. Cholesterol, year 16. Isn't this uncomfortable? I can just feel it in the room. 65% of doctors were doing it. Diabetic foot care, 7 years later, only 20% of doctors were following the protocol. I say it's perfectly reasonable for a concerned, responsible patient or caregiver to Google, take what they learn, and bring it to their doctor. Now, some people say, doctors don't have time in a 15-minute visit to do this. I say, who says it has to be the MD? The modern thinking medical home of the future will have a job called information coach, where somebody can say, I found this, what do you think? Social media is a great way for this information to flow. And yes, people need to learn that they shouldn't pay attention to stupid things. Not everything you see on the internet is correct, obviously. Well, and then I found this book earlier this year, The Fourth Paradigm. It's a book from Microsoft Research, and this is phenomenal. I mean, I'm scientifically trained. This is the history of the dissemination of new knowledge. First time I went to an academic medical conference was in Holland. I was astounded to see researchers presenting their findings and saying, that's it, my work is done. Well, wait, how do we get the word out? Well, scurvy. Everybody knows that the British Navy discovered that citrus would reverse scurvy and save lives. And when you're on a sailboat, this is a big deal because in those days you couldn't just fly in replacement staff. And yet it took 264 years for that knowledge to disseminate, right, through the British Merchant Marine. At 264 years, who knows how many people died? And it turns out that number is on a long trend line. Lister with antisepsis, the guy who, Listerine is named after him. The scale here is how many years, the vertical scale is how many years it takes for findings to get distributed. The horizontal scale is when it was discovered. Even H. pylori, the bacteria that causes ulcers, took 30 years for science to get its head out of its butt and accept the new knowledge. And who knows how many times people were harmed in that time. Well, notice that's asymptoting towards zero. Okay, that's getting closer and closer. Doctors who say that what they were trained on 20 years ago is reality are wrong, all right? And please, this is not overthrowing the establishment. So in this context, 2 years ago at St. Louis Business Health Coalition, I gave a talk like this, and afterwards I was followed on stage, and I'm getting tired of not naming people who are just acting like idiots. So I don't remember the doctor's name, but this guy worked at Barnes Jewish Hospital, which is like the Mass General of St. Louis, and he got up on his panel afterwards and said, literally, this is exactly what it sounded like. If you want to know who the best surgeon is, I'll tell you. Don't get that from some blog. And I was like, oh, mommy, look, a dinosaur. Michael's slide yesterday, this is phenomenal. All right, about how it is that what used to be the big fish eating the little fish all of a sudden says, holy crap, look at all this. It's what Clay Shirky wrote about in the book, Here Comes Everybody. Well, it's perverse to keep people in the dark, to tell them to stay off the internet. Gunther Eisenbach in 2003, he was in Germany at the time, now he's at the University of Toronto, he runs the Medicine 2.0 conference. He wanted to prove to people that they could kill themselves if they got bad information on the internet. He searched for 3 years and found 0 cases, all right? And when you compare that now with the most recent number on harm in hospitals, 440,000 deaths a year was announced last week. Tom Ferguson, the founder of the e-patient movement, said, arguably it's more dangerous not to Google your condition. It's perverse to keep people in the dark and then call them ignorant. Teach them, teach them, teach them, teach them. See, the root of paternalism is it's well-intentioned. There is a time when people need to be taken care of because they can't understand what the issue is. Okay, but there comes a time when the person who was cared for because they couldn't understand becomes autonomous, and they can think for themselves. This is why, for instance, I've expressed so many concerns. I think that PCORI ought to not just be asking patient opinions, but the entire project ought to be driven by what patients want. Later this week in Montreal, a new book is being introduced at the World Parkinson's Congress on this subject. One little tip, you may not be aware, it turns out that, we saw something yesterday about Elaine in Seinfeld. Your health privacy rights, you are entitled to a copy of your records, and it turns out it's actually a civil rights violation for them to say, no, we won't give you your record. So you can go to ePatientDave.com and search for HIPAA and get a copy of this flyer from the Office for Civil Rights. Another thing about pain, just a quick note here, doesn't have anything to do with social media, but this movie in 1983 was about essentially an empathy machine where you could record someone's experience and then play it back so another person could see what that felt like. I'm waiting for this to happen in medicine so that pain can be evaluated. Laura Adams had a patient say, you make me sign a consent form to share my data, you ask my consent to hoard it, and that led to this coffee mug, give me my damn data. You know a movement's becoming a revolution when the artists and musicians show up. Regina Holiday paints people's stories. She's out here, and here she is with the other Regina. We have songs, the e-patient rap, I want to be an e-patient. Well, this has almost 500,000 views. Keith Boone wrote that, and anyway, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump ahead. Eric Topol, this is not all anti-doctor, he did a mashup of the Jerry Maguire Show Me the Money scene, where he's saying, show me the data, and Cuba Gooding says, that's good, Jerry, now you can still be my doctor. Well, friends, it's a revolution, but it's not to burn anything down. It's new possibilities enabled by information liquidity. All right, and just one little personal note. Zoe Chu, well, this summer, I survived to become a grandfather, and guess what my granddaughter's name is? Zoe. With the matching pose, how perfect is that? Right? And in her first 10 weeks, she has developed quite a personality, so I say thank you, medicine, and let's listen to patients.